Lights, camera, action.
Winter is coming.
Welcome to Mixed Take, a World Outspoken podcast where we discuss how the mixing of cultures and heritages in the U.S. influence film, television, and other forms of media and entertainment. I am Robert Rivera.
And I'm Doni Alicea. I wanted to kick off today's episode a little bit differently. Just a quick recap of this season on Mixed Take. We're addressing one simple question, and it's, where are all the brown people in fantasy and sci-fi and comics, basically the otherworldly genres? One would think that worlds birthed from the imaginations of amazingly creative, talented people would think up some pretty cool, diverse characters, but that's not what we really see. So these worlds are often riddled with white male leads, one or two token-ish support casts that are people of color, and then maybe a woman or two thrown in for good measure. And then if it's a Latina, you better be sure that she is going to bring the sex appeal. For me, it's like, where is the complexity? Where are, the diverse languages and cultures and foods and clothes and all the beautiful things that we enjoy about and applaud in different cultures? So today is a really cool day where we get to talk about a show that is near and dear to my heart. Dragon fire breathing, Valyrian steel wielding, wonderful world of Westeros. As we dig into it's one of my favorite shows of all time. But essentially, we're really kind of these conversations are coming from a very specific place of where are the brown people in these shows that we really love.
Doni, I feel like since we began the show, you've been making references to Game of Thrones. This is your episode. This is the thing you've been waiting for a couple of seasons now, almost 2.5 seasons ago. You've been referencing the show, and we have said very little about it.
Yeah.
So we're expecting you to bring on the Dracarys. Wait, how do you say that?
Yeah,
Dracarys.
It's definitely one of my favorite shows of all time. Potentially the best show in cinematic history.
Whoa.
I mean, we'll talk about it. Dem Thrones for y'all throwback people. In preparation for this show, I watched rewatched all 8 seasons over a couple of weeks, and that my only regret with Game of Thrones is that we didn't have a podcast at the time that the show was released. So I was like, oh man, I would have loved to, after each episode, chop it up with Rob and talk about, what we really enjoyed, where were some misses, character development, where the storyline was going. There's so many unexpected twists and turns that it would have been a lot of fun.
No, for real.
But Rob, before you give us your quick take, can you let our viewers and listeners know what we say to the god of death?
Not today.
Can you let our viewers and listeners know if there are going to be any spoilers in this episode? So if watchers and listeners have never seen Game of Thrones.
I'll say this. There may be spoilers.
Okay.
Maybe not.
We'll go with, if you've never seen the show.
Okay. Are you going to spoil anything?
I don't think so. I'm not sure. Because
listen, there will be spoilers.
Yeah, I think it's too hard. I mean, and we're this far removed from the show. It's on what's now called Max. Back in the day would have been HBO or HBO Max if you were in the in-between.
Just pause this episode, go back, watch 76 episodes, come back to this episode, and you're all set.
Yeah. Or you can watch this or listen to this as a prequel and have some insights going into the show, and maybe that'll make your watching even more enjoyable. Just depends on you. So, Rob, if you wouldn't mind, could you give us your quick take on Game of Thrones?
Yes, I'll say this. Game of Thrones, fascinating show, brings out the worst in humanity.
Yeah.
Especially, well, I won't say especially, but I'll say including the topic of racism. I'll just leave it right there.
I love it.
And unpack it later.
That's a great quick take. I would say This
is Game of Thrones. No rules. No rules.
It's my world, y'all. You listen to Mixtape, yummy. I'm just playing. On a show with over 150 characters, major characters. These aren't again, it's eight seasons, but each season the show does a great job of introducing new characters, new families. It's awesome. But with all these major characters, very few are diverse. So I would say overall the show is not a diverse show. And when we finally see brown people, they're likely either a slave or a servant. And with that, let's go ahead and press rewind on this episode of Mixed Take. Okay, so providing a quick overview of Game of Thrones, Michael Harriot, who penned The Black Person's Guide to Game of Thrones. If you haven't read this article, it's fabulous. It's on theroot.com. But he says this: Game of Thrones is basically an all-encompassing analogy for white America. And then he goes on to explain kind of as we see different types of people in the show, who they represent. But he explains that the show is essentially about white-on-white violence because of how much white people love Thrones. So funny, but so true, because essentially the show is a power dynamics show of who is going to essentially rule this fictional world of Westeros that's compiled of 7 different kingdoms. So in the show, there's dragons, and Michael Harriot purports that these dragons are kind of a symbol of white privilege. These monsters that are literally called White Walkers, they are white people. There's these people called wildlings or free folk, which he says are rednecks. There's the King's Guard, aka the Popo. There's white people, which are white people. And then Westeros is essentially medieval Britain. If you look at a map, the map of Westeros and Essos, it actually kind of looks like America and then the rest of the world, interestingly. But I'll take medieval Britain. And then the Lannisters, which are a very powerful family on the show. You meet them in season 1, episode 1, all the way through the last episode in season 8. And he says they're like the Trumps, because it seems like they're such a wealthy family, but ain't nobody ever seen their taxes. So I'm like, this is fabulous. And then there's a family called the Starks. They live in the north. They don't trust anybody. Outsiders, they're looking at side-eyed. They don't like the Popo. He's like, they're like our distant cousins, because they're the closest to brown people that we have in the show. And there's a number of reasons why. But just some important facts, I would say, about Game of Thrones. So, fictional show set in this kind of medieval British world. It's a fight from different families or houses for leadership in Westeros. Many would say that Game of Thrones is the benchmark for fantasy, or if you want to call it sci-fi, but really it's a fantasy genre. It's the benchmark for storytelling, set design. They had amazing dramatic battles. Every week, most episodes are anywhere from 45 to 115 minutes, something like that. You're getting a film every week back when it was released. And epic. The budget was huge. Again, from casting to development to costume design to set design, everything was just top notch. The viewership was 30% female, 70% male, and then 70% of those who watched were between the ages of 18 and 49, which essentially meant that every guy who lives in his mom's basement watched Game of Thrones, and then there were a couple other people sprinkled in between. Game of Thrones has 59 Emmy wins, second only to Saturday Night Live. And the interesting thing about SNL is SNL has 82 wins, but they've been on air almost 50 years, whereas Game of Thrones only had 8 seasons. So comparatively, even though it's second to SNL with the minimal amount of episodes, it's wild that it's even that close. Some of the wins are from things like Outstanding Drama Series, Outstanding Writing, Outstanding Directing. Peter Dinklage, who plays Tyrion Lannister, he took home the supporting actor 4 times, and
he's great.
He's awesome.
He's a standout in that.
So, Rob, what are your thoughts on the overall of the show?
Well, first of all, let me say my introduction to Game of Thrones is really almost through you. Of course, I was familiar with the show, and but streaming, I think, made it a lot more accessible.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there a streaming service when it first came out, or was it just straight on HBO?
Man, I think I want to say it might have streamed on HBO, but HBO wasn't a huge streaming platform when it was. The first big streaming platform was like Netflix, and then others followed. So I would say it wasn't hugely popular.
Okay, so it was through your recommendation and really the way you're hyping up the show right now is what you did to me.
Yeah.
A few years ago, and then I went back and started watching it. Interestingly enough, I was watching it by myself, and then one evening, my wife said, "Go ahead, you can watch it in the living room." I'm like, "I'm kind of in the middle of the show. I don't know if you want to."
Yeah.
She goes, "I don't care. I'll just catch up later." So I turned it on. It was the Red Wedding episode, and that was her first episode.
Oh my goodness.
Do you think she was hooked, or like I don't want to watch anymore?
Hooked.
She was hooked.
Hooked, absolutely.
She went back.
Oh man.
Her philosophy, which I do not subscribe to, is I'll watch it and then I'll rewatch the first episodes like they're prequels.
Oh, I'm not mad at that. That's actually super smart.
No, she tries to do that to me though. Like, hey, watch this show. I'm like, no, I haven't seen the first season. You can watch it as a prequel. No, I cannot. I'm not watching prequels. I'm done with prequels.
Her logic is sound. I'm with her on this.
Yeah. So anyway, I got into the show. Of course, I got hooked.
Of course.
I will say this though, I need to push back just a little bit because my heart beats with Tolkien that Lord of the Rings is the foundation that Game of Thrones is built on.
Okay.
That's it. I'm giving Game of Thrones all of its credit because it does take Lord of the Rings and slaps it with depravity. In a more realistic way.
Yeah.
It's a more realistic feeling.
Yeah.
Whereas in a lot of ways, honestly, I think Game of Thrones feels very biblical. As I read the Book of Judges, the Kings.
Oh, yeah.
It gets, like, if
Dark
you turn those
fast.
into TV episodes,
Yes.
that's Game of Thrones.
Yes.
So humanity's depravity is on full display.
Yeah.
But I think whenever I'm watching anything where depravity is just highlighted, it makes those who are doing the right thing just shine all the more. And so when I watch those shows, I get inspired to think, okay, there's always hope, even in the worst kind of situations. Now, of course, the show's why can't I say that word? Brilliantly. Thank you. I'm getting tongue-tied. Written, and it is, in terms of dialogue, plot, all of that is great.
Yeah.
So you do get hooked. But yeah.
It's an interesting line that you've drawn between Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. And when you listen to George Martin talk about, who's the writer of Game of Thrones, talk about
George R.R. Martin, and that's
right.
not actually his name. That's an homage to J.R.R. Tolkien.
That is awesome. But I was gonna say, in most of his interviews, he will almost always reference Lord of the Rings. He'll reference Tolkien.
But in Lord of the Rings, Aragorn, and he rules nobly for the rest of his life, and that's not realistic. So I want to put realism into this.
Well, he likens himself to J.R.R. Tolkien, and he says, like, why are there so many white people? Well, it's because we're white guys writing what we know. And so when you're from a place and you write what you know, maybe that place isn't diverse. And he's like, for us, it wasn't a very diverse place. So
yeah,
I'm like, it's an interesting take where it's like, oh, okay, we do write what we know. We write maybe from experience or from what we've seen, or something like that. So
I think that's a good segue. Let's get into that a little bit more, because I think there's more of that to unpack. So let's press play.
So Rob, how are people of color portrayed on Game of Thrones?
I'm gonna start backwards here with the prequel, the more recent series, House of the Dragon.
Yeah.
And I see a parallel with the Lord of the Rings, to go back to the Lord of the Rings, with the show Rings of Power. Mm-hmm. You've drawn the connection already. J.R.R. Tolkien and George R.R. Martin are writing in a world that they're familiar with. They grew up learning about King Arthur. They grew up learning about
Robin Hood.
Yes, all of these British and European mythologies, and they're building their imagination upon that. What is interesting is that both both House of the Dragon and the Rings of Power are going back in time, but they're intentionally adding diversity into the mix. So when I think about how color is portrayed in Game of Thrones, I see that there's a huge absence in the actual show. And you've alluded to this already, that when you see people of color in Game of Thrones, they're usually they're always in positions of
servile positions.
Yeah, just portrayed in that inferior. They're like an inferior people.
Yeah. And
in Lord of the Rings, there's more of an absence of people of color. But when you go to the prequels, there's a course correction.
Yeah.
It also begs the question, what happened to all the people of color, right? But I think I'm not hating on the idea that Game of Thrones itself understood, okay, we have a diversity problem.
Yeah. One of the, I think, really important things, like you mentioned, is that course correction piece. Is like, okay, there's an understanding here of maybe where we started from, which is, again, J.R.R. Tolkien or George R.R. Martin's framework, and then maybe where we could be. So I know some people really came from the angle of like, oh, well, this is supposed to be like medieval Britain, and so you need to like stay true to the story and stay true to the historical references. And it's like, wait, historical references? Like,
yeah,
there's dragons, there's ice zombies. Like, there's no historical anything. This is a completely phantasaical world. So it's not like let's argue for we're being historical, and so historical Britain was all white people.
Yeah, and by the way, this even more than Lord of the Rings. I might be ignorant here, so you can correct me, but Lord of the Rings was kind of created in kind of a he's kind of recreating a mythology for Europe. I don't think Game of Thrones is supposed to be our planet, is it?
Well, J.R.R. Martin will lobby for Westeros being akin to Great Britain.
Okay.
Yeah.
But is it Earth?
I think he would say yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, because in his mind he's drawing from his experiences and the stories that he grew up on. He names Robin Hood. He names King Arthur.
I guess my question is, the Lannisters, are there descendants in our world today, according to his mythology?
That's a great question.
Whereas I think Middle Earth is supposed to be ancient Europe, and then when the magic dies, eventually we get to those old medieval stories, and then a mythology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great question for George R.R. Martin, and I think he would say yes. There are Lannisters, and they're called Trumps now.
Okay.
We got the Trump family. Yes, they are because I mean even in like the way Westeros and Esso looks, it looks like the world that we live in.
Okay.
And even with the southern like sand states, I mean that could be Antarctica easily. You know, so I think he would make a logical line there. So of all the black and brown people on Game of Thrones that had lead or major support roles, who were your favorites? And I have some listed out for us.
You're not gonna like my answers because they're pretty
Standard?
tame. Yeah, they're pretty standard.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
of course, Miss Endy
Okay.
is rises to the top, and of course, Grey Worm.
Okay.
Those two probably get the most screen time. They're probably the most developed.
Yeah.
They have arcs.
Yeah.
And there's tragic. You know, they go from points where you think there's hope, and then there's points of tragedy. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
For me, it is mainly them. I like the Dothraki.
Oh yeah.
I think that they're kind of cool, but at the same time, pretty brutal, pretty savage.
Yeah.
But
for our viewers and listeners, explain a little bit of who Missandei and Grey Worm and the Dothraki are.
Well, the Dothraki are now I'm not going into the deep lore here because I don't remember fully, but they are a kind of a savage people, and they play a crucial part in the story because this is where Daenerys Targaryen starts to build kind of her people.
Yeah.
Is through the Dothraki people, but they are more of a Hawaii, like maybe like a Pacific Islander kind of feel. I know
even Native American.
I know Jason Momoa is kind of their king or their chief, or I'm not sure.
A leader.
Their leader.
They call him Khal, I think. Khal Drogo.
And but the way that they interact with each other seems pretty aggressive, and with that being said, there's still some part they're still, in my opinion, kind of a cool people group.
Oh man, if the end of the world comes, I want them on my team. I'm like picking them first. Them or the Unsullied. I'll go. That's a close one too. They're the baddest warriors.
Sullied, yeah, and that's Grey Worm, and they're like an army that was
like castrated at birth, really like bred to be warriors. Like that's the only thing that they've ever learned is to eat, sleep, and drink. Fighting, war. They have no fear. They're kind of born, bred to be, and genetically engineered to just be the baddest warriors.
Now Missandei becomes the queen's like
chief of staff.
Okay.
I don't know, her right-hand woman. Like she's the main advisor, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's her background again?
So Miss Allende, she was born in Nath, which is in the Southern Isles. They're known to be like a very peaceful people. If you can just, imagine like the nicest people ever. The rich people in Essos. So there's really kind of three major parts of the Game of Thrones world. There's Westeros in the west, Essos in the east, and then the Southern Isles. Miss Allende was stolen essentially from her home in the Southern Isles in Nath and brought to Essos to be a slave. And so that's where Daenerys, who is trying to essentially work up her muscle so that she can go back to Westeros and take the throne, she's building an army, and that's where she meets Miss Allende, who's like an interpreter, but super smart and savvy, and just a really kind of intelligent woman.
I think you mentioned this before about Latin women, but I also find it interesting that the Latin man in this show, Oberyn Martell is his character's name. Oberyn?
Oberyn, yes, exactly.
Played by Pedro Pascal. And his character is really interesting, but he is kind of an over-sexualized kind of person as well.
Oh my goodness. Write to us, tweet us, tell us if we're wrong, but it's so interesting to me that a lot of times when there's Latinos cast into roles,
The Latin lover.
Yeah, it's this over-dramatized characterization of Latinos that is so unfair. I mean, are we beautiful? Duh. Our people are gorgeous. We get it. But, again, the over-sexualized nature of how Latinos are portrayed in film. And, again, not just, that's a great point. It's not just the women. It's the men, too. Oberyn, he plays, his role is awesome. He plays a prince from Dorne, one of the Seven Kingdoms.
His performance is great.
Phenomenal. The character that he plays, the performance that he gives, all of it is wonderful. But again, that over-sexualized element is just...
There's one scene with him that really made my eyes pop out.
Is it the last scene?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Oh!
His eyes pop out. I'm sorry. Wait.
This is terrible. Oh, my goodness. I've got to say, for me, one of my favorites, of course, is Khal Drogo, played by Jason Momoa, who you referenced earlier. His time on the show isn't super long, but man, he gives such a great performance. Absolutely loved him. Another was Oberyn Martell for me, was another standout. I thought Pedro Pascal did such an awesome job with the role. He handled it so well, so incredibly believable.
Who's the lady that plays his wife?
Her name is Indira Varma. She played Ilaria Sand.
Yeah,
she did
a great job as well.
Yeah. There were so many people that were standouts in the show. They were phenomenal.
We could say the people of color that are in the show are amazing.
They're awesome. They're fabulous, and they do bring with them a different type of culture to the show. But again, because each house and each family, they have their oomph, they have their thing. And we'll talk in just a little bit about house words and the sigils for each of the houses and how that represents them. But it is interesting that for the Martells, both Oberyn and Ilaria, they did a really great job bringing a Dornish culture to Game of Thrones that was different than what we had previously seen. So, Rob, for those who would say, and they would contend for the need that these roles be filled by white people to maintain that historical accuracy that we talked about earlier, what would you say to those individuals?
So I believe that representation needs to happen when it makes sense. So I'm just going to step back and I'm going to give some grace. I'm not going to go hard on Game of Thrones here. I love when I see diversity. It doesn't take me out of it. So when I'm watching House of the Dragon, I'm not really pulled out of it so much. I do ask a couple of questions. Where did all the black people go by the time Game of Thrones? But anyway, but in terms of just the story itself, it works. It fits. Game of Thrones, if the idea was to create a world, a male-dominated world where women struggle to gain respect, I understand that. Even if subconsciously he's writing it as a commentary of society, because I feel like he's not endorsing it. I feel like there's a lot of critique in kind of how the story is being told, even how people of color are being treated. Yeah. So I think it can serve the plot. It doesn't have to be like Game of Thrones didn't need to be the Lannisters were black people and you know, the Starks were Latino or anything like that. I think about, like, for instance, the movie Hillbilly Elegy. I know it's talking about that movie takes place in a very specific part of the Appalachian region in the United States.
Wait, you said Hillbilly what?
Elegy.
I've never seen this.
No, you should check it out. I think it's is it Apple TV Plus or is it? I can't remember the streaming service right now.
Netflix.
Netflix. Okay.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's Amy Adams, right?
This is Haley Bent. Oh yeah, and Amy Adams.
Amy Adams.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yes. Okay.
Yes, it's a very white movie.
I was gonna
say.
say.
But it needs to be. I think Frida Pinto's in it.
Okay.
Okay, and she is like the only woman of color,
okay.
and I love her. She's great, and she was great in it.
Yeah.
So that's fine. But I understand the story's trying to tell a story of people in that region. And so I don't have any beef. Like, it needs to be more diverse.
Right.
George R.R. Martin created a world, and maybe subconsciously created a white and male dominated, a white male dominated world.
Because that's the world he sees and knows and lives in.
Yeah, as a commentary. But what I do appreciate, if there's any redeeming value to the show, is that commentary is not an approval, but it is. It's more of a critique of this is what happens when one group of people dominates the power, and how men are likely to abuse that power, not just against people of other races and ethnicities, but even against women. So the women are struggling, and the show, I think, has us rooting for the women.
Yes.
Even Cersei. Like, there are times where I was rooting for Cersei.
Yeah. Yeah.
And definitely for Daenerys.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, you're rooting for Sansa and Arya. Like, you love these characters, these women. There are a lot of women that I think rise up to the occasion to be heroic. With that being said, I have to think, even though I don't think he did this on purpose intentionally, to say, I'm going to expose the world. He's trying to write something realistic, and this is kind of just what flowed out of his mind and heart. And so, well, again, I don't think he's trying to make a huge statement here. I think that he is accurately capturing, as I said before, and I'm just going to keep saying it, the depravity of man and what happens when that depravity goes
left
unchecked.
to our own devices.
Exactly.
Oh, man. That is so good. You know, I will say one thing that I was struck by in rewatching the show this past time was the development of the female heroine. Seeing these strong, powerful, smart, savvy women take what the world threw at them, which I think every person who walks this planet will will experience some type of heartache, disappointment, some level of tragedy, loss, heartache. And so the characters in Game of Thrones are absolutely no different. They experience their traumas, and what's highlighted is these particular main characters. They rise from the ashes, and they learn and they grow, and they're so resilient, and they use the flames to come out stronger, like literally. It's not for one character particularly, it's not a metaphor. She literally enters the fire and comes out just stronger and more powerful, literally because of the flames. There's like miracles that happen, and miracles.
Yeah,
magic,
there's definitely a supernatural element, or like a magical. Yeah, magical might be the better word for that. Element. To some of it. Mm-hmm. Then the last thing I'll say, and this is, I guess, me defending George R.R. Martin. Mm-hmm. One thing that I do appreciate is that not every white man is selfish, ruthless. Mm-hmm. You see some very noble white men.
That's
okay.
Great.
And nobody's a perfect character. So I think of Tyrion, for instance. Mm-hmm. Tyrion is not a perfect character, but there's a nobility to him, or noble, or whatever the right word is. Like, you can see that he cares. You can even see an arc in Jaime Lannister. And you can see there's a softness in his own heart. Of course, the different Starks. Jon Snow himself. We haven't mentioned Jon Snow yet, but
I'm still mad at that dude. I can't even talk about it. Carry on.
He did what he had to do. All right.
He didn't have to do it. And watching it this time around, I was like, oh my goodness. He says at one point to Tyrion, did we do the right thing? And Tyrion says, ask me in 10 years.
That's a cop-out. What I appreciate about him, he's not a guy that will stab you in the back.
I mean,
he'll stab you in the front. Also, the women, like he empowers certain women, but not every woman uses that power for good. And let's just be real, the last couple seasons were not fully his.
Right.
You know, those are the showrunners. Benioff and Weiss were kind of doing their own. I think they're taking a skeleton of his ideas and fleshing it out in a way that is less desirable. Whatever. I don't actually have a super strong take on the ending, but the people of color, some are noble, they're rising up and overcoming, and then some are not great people. I think he balances that out. To say that there is good and corruption, there's a broken system, and it's all trying to coexist in this show, much like the messiness of life.
Well, actually, I think he might be shedding light on the fact that the system works as it's meant to. However, Daenerys says this, we need to smash the wheel. So this cycle was set up to work in a certain way to keep, people in their positions of power and influence. But Daenerys is the one throughout the entire show that is saying how what is set up shouldn't be. This is not how things ought to be. And so she starts out in Essos, essentially running for her life. And as she's making her way back to Westeros to take back the throne, she's setting people free along the way, and is like, this isn't how we're going to do things anymore, where there's masters and slaves. Although one running theme throughout the entire show also is Valar Dohaeris and then Valar Morghulis, which is...
Oh, nice pronunciation.
I don't even think I said that right, but it's...
Morghulis.
Valar Morghulis?
Gandules. Did I say it right?
Yes.
You're just speaking a bunch of gibberish there. Yes. And I was just like, I don't know. Donnie is in full nerd mode right now.
I am. This is me geeking out.
This is me, like, after an episode of Mandalorian, I turned to my wife and I start saying some stuff, and she's like, "Stop." She doesn't understand what I'm saying.
No
and
mas.
Frustrated, like one sentence in. So I'm like, all right.
But what's fascinating, Valar Dohaeris is all men must serve, and then Valar Morghulis, which is they're both High Valyrian, is all men must die. And so there's this principle of even if you're ruling, you're still serving. And even if you're serving or ruling, like no matter where you are, you're gonna die. Like that's 100% of people serve, 100% of people die. Which the only question then remains, who are you going to be serving? And when you die, what is the legacy or the imprint that you leave on the world? Which is such a human experience. Like no matter what color the character or where they're from or what accent they have or whatever, the show did a wonderful job of bringing every human into the story because, again, we all experience pain. We all experience heartache. We all know the pain of death, or if we don't know it, we are going to know it. And we know that to some degree or another, there is this element of service in our life, whether it's to family or friends or at work or whatever. We give our time and our energy to something, for something. So it's just a very awesome show, in my opinion. So with that, we'll go ahead and press fast forward on this episode of Next Take. What would having people of color cast into lead roles mean in shows like Game of Thrones?
That's a good question. Before I answer that question, I wanted to address one more thing that Jacob Anderson, who played Grey Worm, said in an interview. He was speaking about he and Natalie, I forget her last name, who played Missandei.
Natalie Emanuel.
And he says, and there's a complaint, I think, sometimes that there are no black people in Game of Thrones. Okay, that's been said. And he says, Natalie and I, we have seen those conversations. It's not lost on us. I want to have a thoughtful conversation about it. I saw an article the other day that was basically like, there are no black people in Game of Thrones, which I can understand where that impulse comes from. But Natalie and I do get erased from the conversation quite a lot, which sucks. And so even as I think about that question, which is a valid question, and we need to think about diversity in the process as we do it with this and in other properties as well. Just recognize those who are actually in the show or in the movie or whatever you're watching, and understanding that there are probably a lot of obstacles for them in the process of making something like this to begin with. But to answer your question, and your question was, what would having people of color cast into lead roles mean in Game of Thrones? Well, I would say, again, I'm okay with the decision of how the characters were written and cast. But let's just say, for instance, Cersei Lannister.
Yeah.
Let's say the Lannisters are black. Do we then have a problem with Cersei's a terrible person? If you have not watched the show, she's a terrible person. You pity her at times, but for the most part, you grow to hate her. If she was a person of color, we would grow to hate that person of color.
Yeah.
Unless we're talking about rewriting the entire show and creating different characters. With that being said, I don't feel that huge weight on my shoulders or as I watch it, I don't feel that ickiness of like, man, the show's trying to erase people, because I think there is somewhat of a critique of white people in power. So if the show had, let's say, the Starks, for instance, what if they were a minority group? I would be fine. I think I would just watch the show and I would never even think anything of it. I've never read the book, so I'm not a purist.
Right.
And I would be fine. So as I watch House of the Dragon, like I said, it does not bother me. It looks cool. I love the diversity. I think looks cool.
I agree.
I love, and I think maybe because it does feel different to see a black man with dreads in that royal garb with power and authority as an equal among his white counterparts. So I like that.
Yeah. His white family.
His white yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm good with that. However, for the storytelling of Game of Thrones, I'm sure I will go back and say, yeah, that feels a little cringe or whatever. I'm mostly okay with the decisions made because I think they serve that overall story.
Yeah.
It's not a white savior story. It's not all the white people are great and noble. So
what would it mean to cast people, brown people, into these lead roles? What would it mean to you? And do you care? Do you care if shows just continue, they don't course correct, they continue with, no, this is medieval Britain, and so it's a 98%
if it's medieval Britain, I'm okay with it being white.
Okay.
But this is not medieval Britain, so I would like to see more diversity. I'm excited for the other genres, as we've already mentioned, Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, doing this as well, adding diversity. It excites me. So yes, I do love it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to play both sides right now, but more diversity I think would be awesome. I mean, Pedro Pascal was the only Latino in the entire show, and I think maybe not, but he's the only one I can remember off the top of my head.
A lead role.
Lead role.
Yes, he is the only one.
And
that I'm aware of also.
And I was drawn to him, and just because I love him as an actor. But I love him as an actor. There's a part of me that loves him just because I love to see Latinos excelling and
in their art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that representation means something to me.
Yeah. I would completely agree. I'm not mad at Game of, in no way does this, what we've talked about in this conversation, take away from my love of the show. I still think that this, and we'll get to my thoughts on the show, but it doesn't take away any of my love for the show or my affinity for it, or will I watch it in its entirety once a year for the rest of my life? Probably. Or maybe at least once every other year for sure. It's just such a great show. But what would it mean to me to see more people that look like us on shows? I think it would mean the world to be able to see people that look like you, maybe sound like you, eat the same foods as you, have the same flag hanging in their house as you. It goes such a long way. And there's a show on Netflix called They Clone Tyrone with John Boyega and many others. Jamie Foxx is also on the show. Fabulous. It's not a show, sorry, it's a film. Fabulous film. Amazing story. Super funny dialogue. Interesting. Kind of a different spin and take on an older film, so it's like, okay, this story has been said before, but this is really funny. These actors are awesome, and it's a different take on the story. But I love seeing Black and brown people cast into these roles, telling these stories in different ways for a new audience. And I want to see more of it.
Yeah, I agree.
Seeing, again, our stories told from our perspective, and not having to see people in these caricature displays, these over sexualized Latino, the like, let's see us as doctors and lawyers and teachers, because that's essentially what we are. So going back to the show just for a sec, this is kind of a more fun, light question for you. But what was your favorite house? And for those of you that are not familiar with Game of Thrones, there are different houses. Essentially, they're privileged, they're older, some of them go back thousands of years, and their triumphs are told in songs and in books and all the things. So for you, Rob, who's your fave?
It's easy. It's the Lannisters. No.
I wouldn't be mad at that.
Doesn't everybody gravitate toward the Starks? Listen, Ned Stark, Sansa. Wait, what's her?
Sansa.
Thank you, Sansa.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Arya. They had all the fun people. Rob and of course Jon Snow is part of that mix as well. So they had the wolves.
They did.
Yeah, they were the coolest. They were the coolest. They're also the people who are. They seem to have the best moral compass. Not always making the best decisions, of course. The mother, kind of shady.
Yeah. Oh,
at times.
the mom. Yeah, she did not make the best decisions.
But for the most part, if I had to live as a servant, because I don't know what else I could live like. I don't know what else I could be in that world. I think with my skin color, I have to either be a servant or savage or something. So let's just say I'm a servant. I would serve them.
That is amazing that you just accepted that. I want to fight. I want to be.
I will.
You will what?
I'll gain their trust, and then yeah. This is Game of Thrones.
Okay.
I don't just sit back.
Okay. Littlefinger up in here.
That's right.
Littlefinger is a powerful character as well.
Shady. I am not. No, I will not be that.
But it's almost like in this world, you kind of have to
Yeah.
like, in order to be anything, you gotta just do the grimiest stuff. It's wild. I'm gonna go House Targaryen, and this is because I love Daenerys, and I think they did my girl wrong in the last season. I don't agree with the ending.
50% of that house sucks right off the bat.
Sucks? Oh.
There's only 2 of them, aren't there?
3. The Night's Watch. Aegon Targaryen. He's the maester.
You're right.
So 33%.
I forgot about him.
33% was terrible.
Yes.
But you're right. There were some crazy people in that. But there's some crazy people in all the houses. Maybe.
Not like that.
I know, not like that. They especially. But Daenerys is my girl. That she came from. I mean. She had the brother that she had, and she still survived. Maybe that was.
Yeah. It's a good thing that none of that trauma, affected her. Later. Way later.
She's a bad mama jamma, and my affections are for her. I mean, if I was like really, House Stark, of course. I mean, they have the best story arc in
They're the Gryffindor of Westeros.
Oh my goodness, of course. If you had a house, what would your sigil be, and what would your house words be?
Oh my goodness, I have zero clue.
I know this is a hard one.
Sigil?
Yeah.
What is that like?
Like your logo. So like, okay, so
it would be okay. It would be. There'd be a blue triangle. Okay. With a singular star. There'd be red and white stripes coming out of it, and then a coquille smack dab in the middle.
This is the Puerto Rican flag, essentially.
That would be my.
I'm with it.
Sigil.
And then your house words would be.
Wepa.
Wepa.
That would be
This is the best answer I've ever heard. This is awesome.
These are the answers you get when you catch me off guard.
I love it. I love it. And with that.
No. What?
Oh, okay.
I'm going to ask you because I know you want.
I don't want to be asked.
So,
what
would your house sigil be? And your catchphrase or whatever. Your motto.
No, I don't want to be asked. I asked you, and that was it. I don't know. I can't. That was the perfect answer. Oh my goodness. I do not know. I mean, it would probably either be something with the Puerto Rican flag or really the Chicago flag is pretty dope too with the 4 stars. Man, my words. Oh gosh, I have no idea. What do we say with Mixed Take? What's our catchphrase here? Providing a mixed take on entertainment.
That would be your house?
No, it wouldn't. I don't know. My house words. Yikes. I gotta think about that. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
Let me. And with that, it is time to press pause and reflect on points that have stuck out to us or some takeaways. And so I have a question for you. As we press pause, is Game of Thrones the best show ever?
Man, is Game of Thrones the best show ever? No.
Oh, no?
What, you thought I would say yes?
Yes.
It's one of the,
maybe not.
It's one of the best. I don't really know what the best is, and I'm hesitant to just put it on the throne.
Oh.
I would say some other shows that rival. This one is a little bit of a stretch, but however, I do love it, so I have not rewatched it. So it might not actually hold up very well. But Battlestar Galactica, 2004.
No.
Have you ever seen Battlestar Galactica?
Back in the day.
The 2000s, not the old 1980s or 70s or whatever.
Battlestar Galactica 2004? Yeah, this is exactly what I thought it was. What?
That show is great.
Bruh.
Are you kidding me?
I mean, it was a good show, but the best of all time?
Time out.
Stop.
I didn't say it was the best of all time.
Wait, that's what we're talking about.
I
the
said,
best show ever.
What I said was there are other great shows like that one, or even if I go animated, Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh no.
Amazing. You know, I love Star Wars, so I'm going to have to go Clone Wars or Rebels are also great shows. I understand they're animated. It's really hard to compare that to Game of Thrones. Got it. I think Stranger Things is also an amazing series.
Great show.
So these are all great.
The best
If
ever?
I step out of genre, though, like Breaking Bad is an incredible show.
Great show.
Better
The
Call
best?
Saul. Breaking Bad? Maybe.
Great show, hands down.
Maybe.
Top 50 for sure.
The
Best
Office?
Ever. Top
Can
10.
I throw comedies in here?
Yeah.
I mean,
Good night.
maybe it is The Office. Family Ties? No, just kidding.
I mean, The Office. That's a great one.
Parks and Rec.
Friends, maybe top 20.
I would say so as well. I've never seen it.
You've never seen Friends?
Isn't that funny?
Oh, HBO.
I've seen episodes. No, I'm not looking to catch up. I've seen episodes and things. It's just
No, it's a good show. It's worth the watch.
weird shows that I've never seen are like Friends, and like I've only seen episodes of Friends, and I've only seen episodes of Seinfeld.
Oh, Seinfeld's another good one. I mean, I wouldn't put it up there as the best ever, but
Some people might.
good entertainment.
Game of Thrones is super epic, so in that sense, it is probably the most epic show I've ever seen.
Ever.
Probably.
Okay.
Show.
We'll take it.
Show.
All right. That's awesome.
I don't know if it is the best. Yeah, I don't know if I can say that.
Aren't you gonna ask me?
Donnie, which show in your head
man.
is better than Game of Thrones?
Man, I can't think of a single one. I mean, again, like, can we talk about awesome shows that are out there? Apple TV has a ton of really good shows.
Yeah, Apple TV doesn't have a show that competes with Game of Thrones. I'll admit that.
It doesn't have a show that competes, that is for darn sure. But there are some really great shows, some good storytelling. See The Morning Show.
Great. Those are great.
There's a bunch of Severance.
I'm an Apple TV show
enthusiast.
Yes, I love their shows are great.
Same. Loot. If y'all haven't seen Loot.
That one I have not.
Oh, it's so good. Oh, you will really like it. It's so great. It's about
Wait. Is that the one? No, that's not the one with Aubrey Plaza, is it?
No, it's with
I can't remember.
Maya Rudolph.
Okay, I know what you're talking about. I have not seen it.
And Michaela J. Rodriguez.
Okay.
It's super good.
Okay.
But anyway, so are there great film shows out there? Absolutely. But for me, I think Game of Thrones is the GOAT, and it takes the cake for me. The show is boiled down to cripples, bastards, and broken things.
Oh. Why isn't it higher on my list then? Give me some more bastards.
That's like the show summed up. Despite the lack of diversity, I would say what makes this show so relatable is that we find in all the characters just this, again, brokenness, this overwhelming humanity that is so familiar. The Starks, they take the deplorable things of life, the most tragic, awful things that one can do to another person, and they come out stronger. So it's such, I don't know, in me it just creates such like this love for some of these characters. Again, the story arc I think is pretty phenomenal. The ending is super disappointing, but I don't mind being disappointed in this show because the show is full of disappointments. It's full of triumphs and like awesome stuff too, but I just really enjoy I like being surprised, and it's hard for me to be surprised in most shows or films because certain things are just like you expect something to happen and then it's gonna happen. With Game of Thrones, it's all about the unexpected.
Yeah, do not get attached to anybody.
100%.
Dracarys.
So this is where we press stop.
We press
Dracarys.
Dracarys.
And now our watch has ended.
My watch is ended.
Thank you so much for joining us, for making it to the end of this podcast.
Yes.
You stuck with us through this very in-depth. Thank you for the in-depth coverage of Game of Thrones.
And thank you for your insightful comments and thoughts. This was fun.
I don't know anybody's name, but yeah.
There's so many. 150 major characters. That's wild.
Yes. Join us next time as we continue to weave our way through the diversity in these nerdy stories. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, or a review is great. Anything. We're beggars. Give us everything you've got.
Just a little bit. Just a little something.
Also, head open. Let me start. Head open. This is Game of Thrones. Heads are opening. Guts are spilling. Head over to worldoutspoken.com, a site preparing the Mestizo Church for cultural change, where you'll find information on consulting services, thought-provoking blog posts, and great podcasts such as Mixed Take. Oh wait, that's ours. Sorry.
Hey.
The Feature, Questions from the Pew, La Ventanita, the Mestizo Podcast, a show for the mixed people of the mixed church. Also, head over to World Outspoken and grab some swag. Get yourself a hoodie or some stickers for your water bottle, journals, all types of stuff. Do they have like their own Jordan?
They should.
Like the World Outspoken Jordan? No?
Yeah.
The Rickies?
Exactly. Yeah, we
that's
need
what
that.
I want.
Also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Mixtake. You can also follow Rob on Twitter at RobRiv, that's ROBIV.
An X, what it's called.
Twitter X. And you can follow me at DoniJack, DONIJAC. Special thanks to our producer, Rich Hurtado, and also thanks to Emmanuel Badia and the World Outspoken crew. We hope you join us again as we continue to dive into the nerdy part of the world of culture influencing entertainment. Until next time, cut.
It's a wrap.